Hello everyone, this is Douglas E. Welch and welcome to this episode of What Douglas Dug, highlighting some of the unique gardening items I've come across in my internet travels. For more gardening information, you can always visit the blog, A Gardener's Notebook, at douglasewelch.com. Starting out today, we have some interesting DIY projects. This is from Timber Press, and it highlights how to make some concrete stepping stones. Now, one of the more unique aspects of these stepping stones, because there's lots of these projects out there on the internet, is it uses a doormat, an outdoor doormat, as an embosser to basically emboss a pattern into the concrete stepping stone rather than putting in mosaic tiles or other items or even pressing words into the stepping stone. I thought this was very unique and a unique use of something you wouldn't normally consider when making stepping stones. Stepping stones are a great addition to any garden. They allow you to add some character to your garden, also kind of put your own personal mark on your garden, and it gives people a great path to lead them, hopefully, back to some great focal point in your garden. The next item, which I found pinned on Pinterest, is this lovely mosaic tile pattern. Unfortunately, there isn't much information about this mosaic. The link on Pinterest goes to a password-protected page, so you can't get to the actual information. But I thought it was a great piece of inspiration to show what you can do with mosaic tiles, and the fact that mosaic tiles need not be simply squares or other usual shapes. You can actually get quite creative with your mosaic tiles and come up with something that is absolutely gorgeous. Now, looking at this feature reminded me that somewhere in my dark farm country past, I vaguely remember some farmer who had done this on their property. If you don't recognize this feature that you were seeing on the screen, this is what we used to call a disc. Some people call a harrow. It's a piece of farm equipment that's used to fit up land prior to planting. Usually it's horizontal with the disc carving into the soil, but in this case, instead of simply letting the old harrow rot over in an empty lot on the farm, which is quite common, they've actually taken one of the section of harrow blades, turned it upright, fitted it with a water fitting up the center, and created this lovely, lovely fountain. Something not all of us could do. It's a big project, probably required a backhoe or something to lift this into place because it is quite a heavy piece of equipment. But I do absolutely adore what they've done here. I also like the fact that it isn't a big pool underneath. It's the standard rock-covered basin, which allows the water simply to go back into the basin and be recirculated to the top. Now again, not something that all of us would have the ability to do, but if you have a piece of farm equipment or you happen to come across one at an auction and you have the space, this could be an excellent thing to add to your garden. It adds height, it adds drama, and I can almost guarantee that very few people visiting your garden even know what it is. They will think it's something you had custom built just to make a garden fountain out of. Now, we can all use a little inspiration in our gardens, and I'm always looking for inspiration. In this case, I came across in Southern Living magazine this huge article on 82 creative container gardens. They have container gardens for nearly every purpose, every location in your garden, including dry, damp, shady, wet, whatever. I'm sure that you would find some great inspiration here, just simply flipping through these various container gardens and seeing what you might be able to add to your own garden. Containers are very useful. They help us fill holes in the garden. They help us fill areas where perhaps the soil isn't up to snuff and we haven't had a chance to naturally build up the soil. They can hold that place for the time being. In my case, I'm planting vegetables in containers, mainly to take advantage of very specific sunny areas I have in my garden. Most of my garden is all shade, and so it's very important for me to be able to move stuff around and get it into the areas where we get the most sun possible. Even then, it's rare we get a full 8 hours of sun, but we're certainly doing better than we do in the back garden, which is totally surrounded by mature trees. But I'm sure if you flip through this list, you'll find some container that will fit into your garden. I particularly love these box gardens here, sort of like a simple mini raised bed that you can put anywhere. I've often joked with my wife that I'm going to take over our cement driveway and turn it into raised beds, but we do have to have a place to park the car, so maybe that's not going to happen anytime soon. Here you have another one that is kind of a series of raised beds, giving you a little more height, a little more drama in the garden. Planting your typical boxwoods. Again, so many different options available to you. Definitely worth spending some time poking around and seeing what might apply to your garden. Now, it's not often that we turn to a site like Mashable, which is basically a tech site for our gardening information, but they had a great article on 5 free iPhone gardening apps. I make it a point whenever I can, if they're free, to check out any gardening app I happen across on the iTunes store. In this case, they've highlighted 5 of these items here that I have not actually heard of. The first one is Garden Light. Then you also have Garden Plot. And there are little short reviews of each of these apps, so you can see if there's some here that you might want to test out on your iDevice. Most are available for both the iPhone and the iPad. Here's one from the Royal Horticultural Society called Grow Your Own, which gives you all sorts of great information on growing food products in your garden. One on organic gardening and planning out your organic garden. And finally, My Garden app. So hopefully there's something in these 5 apps that can offer you a little assistance in your garden. There are many more available in the iTunes store, and this gives me a point to say too that there'll be links to all these articles and all these pages that I'm showing you today on the website and as part of the description of this YouTube video. This is an idea which I kicked myself when I saw it because I go, why didn't I think of that? Again, that's what the internet is great for. It's reminding us of those things that we probably had in the back of our mind but had never really acted upon. The funny part is I actually have some of these solar lights in my garden. They're relatively inexpensive. I get them from my local Osh or Orchard Supply warehouse store just less than a mile away from where we live here. And I have a couple of old chandeliers that we took out of the house when we moved in to replace with a little more appropriate lighting fixtures. In one case, I use one as a scary chandelier for my Halloween decorations, but I have yet another one which would easily work with this type of arrangement. What you do is you simply take the solar lights off their stake, and they usually come in 2 or 3 parts, place them into the chandelier pots after you remove the lights, or perhaps you have a candle chandelier which is already appropriate. There's nothing even to remove from them, and you simply replace those with the solar lights. As long as you've got a good spot that is sunny enough in your garden to charge up these lamps, they should last most of the evening if you're having a dinner party or having friends over for drinks in the garden. I love to be able to use recycled items in my garden, and this photo from In Diva's Garden shows us a great way of repurposing some old doors. I think this works great. These are doors that had upper window panes. You can remove those. It opens the arbor up quite a bit. Might not work quite as well with solid doors, but I'm sure you can find some similar doors to this in your local architectural surplus store or something like that. Otherwise, what a great way of reusing things in your garden. I replaced some doors in my own home a few years ago, and they went out into the garden. They were decorated. Maybe they had a hanging plant put on them. In one case, I stenciled some ivy leaves on them. They are set into the walls where the creeping fig is already growing, and the creeping fig starts to grow over them. They just make nice little architectural statements in the garden. You might also, in this case, instead of making an arbor, put a mirror back where the window is and then place that door in your garden, and it creates an effect where it makes the garden look much larger than it truly is, because the mirror, of course, reflects the trees and the other plants and makes it look like a window rather than a mirror. If you've got a way to reuse items like this in your garden, please do it. We need to send less stuff to our landfill here in Los Angeles. It's a big issue, so anything I can reuse in my garden, I do. I'm certainly going to keep this idea in mind if I come across some doors like this. Even just by looking at this picture, I think it would be easy to recreate. It's basically the doors with the top pieces and some supports, and I think would make a great addition to any garden. And finally, I want to leave you with just a bit of inspiration. This photo is a great example how the beauty of nature in itself, with a little help from us in designing and building something like this, forms together to make an absolutely gorgeous view. I'm not sure exactly how they've made the stepping stones stable enough to walk on here. I assume there's perhaps an underwater concrete footing that they sit on, but oh my goodness, imagine walking out of your home, walking into the back part of your property and seeing something like this on a chilly fall day. The colors are dramatic. The floating nature of the stones makes it almost perfect. And I keep stuff like this around for inspiration. I might not be able to do something this grand, this large, but in a lot of ways, and this goes for a lot of the stuff that I focus on here on What Douglas Dug, they can be inspiration for doing something of our own. We may not duplicate it exactly, in fact we don't have to, but if we can take inspiration from ideas like this and do something small, similar in our own gardens, I think we'll all benefit. Well, thank you so much for watching this episode of What Douglas Dug. Again, you can find out more gardening information on A Gardener's Notebook at douglasewelch.com.